The beginning is a very delicate time. But who cares about that? Let's talk about Dr. No. Big surprise. I also own this one on VHS, along with all of these ones. James Bond is one of the longest running film franchises of all time, with 25 official films and 2 unofficial ones. Most of the time, the first film in a long-running series is the best one, as it needs to be good enough for an entire franchise to come after it based on the groundwork. Another common thing is for the first film in a series of adaptations to be based on the first novel in the original series. However, Eon, the production company, didn't have the rights to Casino Royale, the first novel in the Bond series, so they skipped all the way to the 6th novel, Dr. No. Is this movie really good enough to have an entire franchise spanning 60 years come after it? Let's see. Dr. No is a 1962 film starring Sean Connery, Ursula Andress, and Joseph Wiseman. The film begins with the iconic gun barrel sequence, which is a bit different than the ones that would come later, as instead of immediately beginning with the Bond theme, it starts off with some beeps and boops, and then starts the theme when Bond fires his gun. Again, instead of the usual pre-credits action sequence, we go straight to the opening titles. After this, we see John Strangways, the station chief of MI6 in Jamaica, get murdered by a trio of assassins called the Three Blind Mice. They then go and kill Strangways' secretary, and MI6 loses contact with Jamaica. James Bond is introduced playing baccarat in a club, played by Sean Connery.
Bond. James Bond.
Bond gets briefed by M, who is the head of MI6 or MI7?
Since I've been head of MI7, there's been a 40% drop in double O operative casualties, and I want it to stay that way.
This is a really confusing line because you can see his mouth say MI6, but it's dubbed over so he says MI7. This is really odd because other characters in the film call it MI6. Anyway, Bond is assigned to go to Jamaica to investigate. Strangways was there helping the CIA investigate radio jammings of rocket launches from Cape Canaveral. M also confiscates Bond's firearm, and this guy, who is supposed to be Q, provides him with a Walther PPK. Bond arrives in Jamaica and is given a ride to his hotel by an enemy agent. When Bond confronts him, the agent bites into a cyanide cigarette and kills himself. Bond begins meeting with all the people who met with Strangways before he died. He visits Strangways' home and sees a receipt from a man named Professor Dent. He also finds a picture of Strangways with a man named Quarrel. Bond meets with Quarrel and they fight for a moment before CIA agent Felix Leiter stops them and tells Bond that Quarrel worked with him in Strangways. Bond, Felix, and Quarrel meet at a bar and they question a suspicious photographer. She doesn't reveal anything other than how tough Quarrel is, because she slashes off half of his face with a light bulb and Quarrel just smiles. She also raises suspicion about an island named Crab Key and its inhabitant, Dr. No. They talk about some rock samples from the island that they sent to Professor Dent. Bond later returns to the hotel and the Three Blind Mice attempt to kill him, but fail. Bond visits Professor Dent next day, and Dent claims that the rocks from Crab Key were just iron pyrite. However, Dent goes off to Crab Key to meet with Dr. No, who isn't actually seen in this scene, or any scene for that matter, until the last 20 minutes. Dr. No gives Dent a tarantula to kill Bond with, which is quite silly because tarantulas aren't lethal to humans. However, we still get a fight scene between James Bond and the tarantula, where James Bond squashes it with his shoe to some Looney Tunes-esque music. Bond visits the embassy the next day and makes a date with a secretary, and later heads to her place, but he is followed by a hearse and we get the first car chase of the series. Unfortunately, this scene is just really not that great, as the rear projection is awful, and the shots just aren't that exciting. When the hearse crashes down a hill, the back immediately flops off and the hearse promptly explodes. Bond arrives at the secretary's house and has her arrested. He waits at her house, and in a really cool scene, he waits for Dent to show up. He sits there playing solitaire and then just shoots Dent when he shows up, after he tries to kill Bond. Bond and Quarrel go to Crab Key, and the next morning they meet Honey Rider, played by Ursula Andress. They hide in a swamp from some guards that are hunting for them, and Quarrel and Honey bring up a dragon, which is actually just a flame tank that kills my boy Quarrel. Bond and Honey get captured. They're brought into a giant facility and decontaminated of radiation from the swamp with just a bit of soap and water. They get taken into some really nice hotel rooms and are drugged and they fall asleep. When they wake up, they are invited to dinner with Dr. No. There's this weird shot where Bond pauses to look at a painting. The painting is of the Duke of Wellington, which was stolen in 1961, not by a Chinese scientist, but by a disabled man who stole it in protest of the BBC television license. Over dinner, which appears to be 3 grapes and some juice, Dr. No mentions that he is part of a corporation called Spectre, or Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. He reveals that he was behind the radio jammings, and he is planning to jam another rocket launch. He asks Bond to join Spectre, and after he refuses, he has Honey taken away, and he beats up Bond. Bond wakes up in a cell, and we get a pretty cool scene of where he sneaks through the vents in the facility and shows up in the decontamination room. He steals someone's hazmat suit and sneaks into a big reactor room. Of course, in the later Bond films, the villain layers would be humongous, sprawling sets, and this gives us a glimpse of that, but due to its rather low budget, we don't really see what the production designer, Ken Adams, can really do. Anyway, Bond climbs up to this platform and begins overheating the reactor pool. Dr. No goes up and attacks Bond, and we get a short and kind of underwhelming fight scene. Dr. No's gimmick, which is his metal hands, isn't used at all in this scene, other than kind of being his undoing as he falls into the reactor pool and can't grip a pole to climb out. After No is defeated, Bond goes off to save Honey, who is strapped to a slope by a little pool. Bond and Honey escape the base as it crumbles and explodes. Honey and Bond climb into their boat, but soon run out of gas, and Felix shows up and begins towing in Bond's boat, but he'd rather make out with Honey than get back to land, I guess. So, that's Dr. No. All the tropes and character archetypes that would become common in the later films are almost fully formed here, but they would certainly be done better later. Guess you could say this is just a jack of all trades, king of none. Very vanilla, but still good fun. So, have you seen Dr. No? If you haven't, maybe you should. And if you have, maybe you should watch it again. Thanks for watching. See ya.